Dear colleagues, dear friends, it's my great pleasure to welcome everyone here today to this Law After Lunch meeting and to have 1 hour time to discuss current issues of international commercial law, of digitalization, of end-to-end digitalization of trade in Europe, but not only in Europe in the narrow sense, but in a broader sense, I would put it in words. And it's my great pleasure that I finally may welcome here my dear friend and colleague, Luca Castellani, who has spent many, many years working for Ancestral and doing digitalization of trade, but not only, CISG and electronic transferable records and all kind of things which are related, I would say, as you would say it, for everything but arbitration. Everything but arbitration in Ancestral, very broad portfolio. And I can recall very good, very pleasant and successful our joint collaborations in different areas of this world. And it was no opportunity to get him or to draw him here to Halle. And now I'm happy that Luca has joined us and will provide this, I would say, masterclass even, because this is a person who knows what's going on everywhere in the world and try to get all these developments together with different various international organizations. So Luca, this is it. I think it's enough of introduction, and I would say the floor is yours, and we are very looking forward for your presentation and the discussions.
Thank you very much, dear Azar, and good afternoon to everyone here, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to those who are following online. As you said, it was long due, and I'm really happy to be here today, finally, in Halle, but we have been working together for many years and quite successfully everywhere, but I would say especially in Azerbaijan. So some good work being put there, and it's not wrong to start by mentioning Azerbaijan, because actually it is exactly one of those countries that is in Europe with many shared commercial interests with the European Union, but not only, but is also very much into digitalization and at the forefront, not only because Azerbaijan has adopted many texts from Ancestral, but also in other fields. So it is quite appropriate to make reference to Azerbaijan. I think that the best thing at this point is to just start with my presentation. And every time I speak about this, of course, I discover something new even in what I say, not revolutionary, not 100% change from before. But this time, as I was preparing for this conversation, I realized that the real problem what we're talking about is not so much about trade in itself. Trade is, of course, has been practiced for thousands of years. We all know why we like international trade as an engine of economic development, but also I would add the ability to have access to goods and services that come from afar are beneficial for ingenuity, for creativity, so that there is always a new application and something new in progress at large. But the real issue is that trade has been always one way or the other documented. So there is the need to keep a record, either of what is being stored or even of exchanges, which are actually contractual agreements. Apparently, a lot of the early documents that we find from Mesopotamia are accounting and legal documents related to storage and exchange and the like. So these things were preserved for maybe 5,000 years with that type of information. And documentation is needed, or recording information is needed for two main reasons. I'm talking, of course, about trade. One reason is because of the commercial exchange, so what we call the business to business. But the other reason is for regulatory purposes, regulation. If we go back in time, a long time ago, of course, the main interest of the regulator was taxation. But this has changed, and is changing more and more. And if we focus on Europe, we see that the European Union has probably the most demanding information requirements at large for regulatory purposes in the world. This is a lot, and as someone who believes in the ability of the market to find an efficient balance, of course there is also a concern about excessive regulatory demands. People who are dealing with cross-border trade, they know very well when for instance, a shipment is sent to certain countries, how many documents and how many entities are involved. But we are always talking about maybe sometimes you hear 70, 80 documents. Sometimes you hear up to 100 agencies, maybe not all of them necessarily, but one or the other could be involved depending on the nature of the goods. Of course, we have had an acceleration in the last 50 years of the use of electronic means. The people here in this room, the vast majority is very young, so this statement will sound a bit funny. But online, of course, we may have a bit older audience. They know what I'm talking about, the level of pervasive penetration of electronic communications in the daily life is truly unprecedented. Every day is more unprecedented because it's increasing day by day. And obviously, the availability of this information in electronic form has opened the door to a systemic use, I would say. Firstly, in the first maybe 20 or 30 years, the issue was connectivity. So information should be available anywhere, anytime. And it's not a challenge that we have already globally solved, because not everybody has access to information from any place and at any time. But now in the last 20 years, we have moved from just having access to information to having the ability to analyze and aggregate, analyze, and reuse the information. So it's a data society, data economy, data whatever. And that is different, obviously. It's very different. These trends have obviously an impact also on the issue of recording information for trade purposes. And so some concepts emerged over time. You see here I took a definition of trade facilitation coming from APEC, actually, because I wanted to at least clarify that trade facilitation is a notion that is mostly used for B2G exchanges. But it doesn't have to be. It's just a matter of agreeing on vocabulary and taxonomy. But then, when we add the magic word paperless, we presume that we will do this electronically. So we come up with paperless trade facilitation, which is the use of electronic means I would say to simplify, yes, import-export procedures. To harmonize, by all means, yes, but especially to modernize, which in reality means make them more efficient and increase both the level of compliance and the collection of duties. So it's a win-win. It's not a process where one thing goes to the detriment of the other. And of course, if we are talking about import-export, there is also important dimension that relates to borders control, because advanced information means more security, more time to analyze. Like every document, a trade document has to provide assurance of the quality of its content. Well, it's not the trade, I mean, the assurance is in the trade document, but of course it's the creator of the document that provides the assurance. When we think of paper, and I think that we should really always think of paper when we speak about electronic, you have certain qualities, the origin, the integrity, the permanence of the medium, the time when the document was created or was amended, or even the ability to control the document, which is typically called possession. These are not new problems. I would say there has been awareness, also legal awareness, at least for the last 500 years, with evidence rules about the use of writing, with the intervention of trusted third parties, the use of handwritten signatures in Europe, but for instance, the use of seals in East Asia. So there are cultural differences, but these are both techniques to associate a physical person with the content of a document. What has changed a bit now and is that in an electronic environment, the functions are performed by definition by something called a trust service. And a trust service is indeed a service that provides assurance of data quality. So the definition of trust service is such. But trust service has been conceptualized, to the public since 2014 with the first EIDAS regulation, or actually, it has been revised, but fundamentally it's the same. But electronic signatures have been there for a long time. It is not that I say they've been there for a long time because all of us have seen something. The first modern case that deals with electronic signature, not the first, but one of the first cases that is usually cited, is a case from the US, from New Hampshire, from 1869. So it's about 170 years old, 160 years old. What really fascinates me is that in 160 years of this case, which is perfectly applicable to the current issues in its reasoning and its words, in 160 years we have yet to have a common and established understanding of what's an electronic signature, which makes me think of how the law works if 160 years was not enough. But anyway, leaving that aside, we now deal with trust services. Signatures are part of it, seals, time stamping, for instance, and so on and so forth, precisely to provide this data quality assurance. What has changed in the last couple of years, and I believe that there is a need for a little bit more of attention, is the so-called stabilized text of the Joint Statement Initiative on e-commerce. Now, leaving the professors aside, who has heard about this before here? It's not an overwhelming support. So maybe we need to fill a gap. As you know, but if you don't know, we have here an authority to tell you. The World Trade Organization has had some hiccups, or in the last few years in its ordinary course of business, where there were issues with different parts, and of course the creativity of certain states that want the WTO to continue carry on its good work, came up with some so-called plurilateral initiatives, called Joint Statement Initiative. And in particular, there was one at MC12, but I hope I got the number right, but MC12 was in Buenos Aires. It was 6 years ago. It was a joint statement of a number of groups on possible work that could be done in the field of electronic commerce, which is called electronic commerce, but it's really digital trade, but traditionally called electronic commerce. The WTO program on electronic commerce is quite traditional. You may have heard of a discussion, for instance, a moratorium on the duties and so on and so forth. But this one wanted to innovate and leverage existing regional treaties to provide a new agreement that would move forward with mapping the legal framework for digital trade. Because of the political situation, this has not yet become formally a treaty in the WTO system. But under the guidance or coordination of the three countries that started the process, which are Australia, Japan, and Singapore. So it's important also to bear in mind we're all in East Asia, or in that part of the world, East Asia in a broader sense. A stabilized text was agreed by 60 plus countries, including most large economies, with the exception of the United States, that was in the process but did not agree to the final text for some specific reason. It's really useful to look at this text, even if not in force, for two reasons. One reason is that it gives a summary, state of the art of where the discussion, the legal discussion is on this topic. So it is really ready to access. And the other one is that certain states, China, for instance, but I think also the Philippines, maybe also South Korea, they said they will implement unilateral. So they said even if it is not a treaty, even if we cannot formally ratify it as a treaty, but we will implement its content because we think it's useful. And this stabilized text. Stabilized text means everybody who signed this agreed to this text. Is divided in 5 parts, if I remember correctly. And importantly, it introduces this goal of having end-to-end trade digitalization, which means that the whole process should be covered by electronic communications, and ideally, all of these documents should be digitally native. So the reason for that is to ensure consistency of the information across the supply chain. You see here, this is the enabling electronic commerce. When there are other parts that go a little bit more on the regulation, openness, and this is the part which is maybe more controversial, because in the end it touches also upon the moratorium, for instance, and other issues which are very much open at the WTO. And then there is some security measures like consumer protection, some minimal standards for data protection, and spam, cybersecurity. I would say trust services. One would think they go into trust. They're called trust services, so they are tools to build trust. But because they are traditionally associated with electronic transactions, which in turn come significantly, at least from a conceptual point of view, from general contract law and the like, because there are always form requirements and other things that are typically of contract law. Then you will find Article 5, which is the one on electronic signatures and other trust services, in the part on enabling electronic commerce. So it's an enabler, which is also fine, of course. And actually, there is also an article on authentication, which is a little bit how can I say, the dark brother of electronic signatures, because many people in implementation and in technology understand authentication and don't understand electronic signature as a legal concept, but in reality the two are if not the same, they overlap. The number one problem when it comes to electronic signatures is actually the interoperability problem and the mutual recognition, because electronic signatures are quite clear at the national level, but how to make them work, how to make their effects be recognized across borders is a real problem. It is a problem that I think now we have to start to discuss seriously. Why I say the JSI stabilized text is so important. Now here you have to think, if we think of any international commercial transaction, I'm talking about trade, as I said before, it's a business-to-business transaction. And you have there some general principles. Here, not so much freedom of contract, which is important, however, for a market economy, but the principle of party autonomy. Party autonomy, of course, traditionally means that the parties are free to agree on the content of the contract, but specifically it also means that the parties are free to decide the technology and the methods used for their electronic communications. So it has a very specific meaning in the context of digital trade. And that has an application which is equally important, which is the principle of technology neutrality. Technology neutrality, which is, at least in words, upheld by most jurisdictions. It says that the law shall not mandate or favor the use of any particular technology, system, method, or product. Why? This is done for a couple of good reasons. One of them is that technological innovation happens very fast. And since it happens so fast that we don't want to go back to the legislator every time that there is a new technology. So we want to describe things in a manner which is technology neutral. And in doing so, we make the law future-proof. The other very good reason is that if we decide to use a specific technology or format or product, not only we will miss out on future innovations, but we may fall into so-called proprietary lock-in. So if we decide that we use only a certain software for a certain process, then we will always have to buy that software, and the maker of that software will have, of course, a certain influence on us. This is all good and well, except that electronic signature laws sometimes are not technology neutral. But we are in the B2B part. When we go to the B2G part, and remember paperless trade is about B2G, then we have a concept which is overarching, which is the customs single window, where the traders submit the information. But this is a B2G process. And because it's a B2G process, customs are a public body. May I add, in many countries, customs are a very influential body, very important for revenue, but also very important politically. So I would say the less developed the country, the more important the customs are in the economy, because this is something that may be seen from Germany, seen from Europe. It doesn't seem so clear as it seems from a developing country or a least developed country, where you have duties on imported goods or luxury goods or things, so. If you see it from that point of view, of course, when these facilities or infrastructures with single windows are set up, sometimes in good faith, customs ask for a submission in specific formats or with specific technologies and methods, which adds to the cost, but also creates a rupture between the regular business-to-business data flow and the submission of the information. So it's exactly that point that needs to be addressed, because the valuable information is in the B2B flow. And so there is the need to make also submissions to government more in line with technology neutrality, so that they would benefit from getting directly the information from the traders and not having it resubmitted in a specific format or method. So the question is there, and this is what I just said. I said when you have B2G that is on specific standards, and then you have to fill this gap. And the JSI, in my opinion, sets although it says that there could be exceptions for security reasons and other reasons, but at least it sets common standards, very baseline standards that all the laws can comply with, and then the exceptions should be really exceptional, should be very limited, because otherwise there will be a failure in this end-to-end trade facilitation. And I will make you a very simple and quick example. We are now working on digitalization of the bills of lading. Now, bills of lading are very important because they have a certain economic value, because they can be used for transfer of title, but they can also be used as a collateral for financing. And therefore, they have the best data quality. So the data is complete, accurate, authentic, and up to date. And so what we wanted to do is to use all the information in the bill of lading for submission of the import declaration to the customs. And this can be done technically. It's comparatively simple. An API or something can go and grab the information and simply replace the customs declaration. In fact, some customs which are quite advanced were already doing so. Because at the end of the day, the customs authority is not interested in the document as an abstract document. It's interested in the information relating to the shipment. And if someone takes responsibility for the submission of the information, regardless of the existence of a document on paper or electronic that is called declaration, they have what they need to have, and they can be happy with it. And this can, for instance, can solve a problem which now is very meaningful, which is the problem of small parcels shipped across borders. Now there is a new, I think, €2 tax to penalize this kind of shipments, and all the customs authorities in Europe are under heavy pressure because of this explosion in the number of parcels which is being sent individually. Of course, one can use, these parcels are not covered by a bill of lading, but there is a shipping manifest. So one can grab the information from that document, which is functionally the same for the purposes of my example, and can send it automatically to customs to see if they meet or not the minimis requirements or any way to expedite the payment of duties. So you see, this is very abstract, but all of a sudden becomes very concrete and solves a real life problem. So if we go to the legal side, of course, this is just a reminder of what is out there. You will read, hopefully, the JSI statement. You will see the articles there. You will see that they make reference to certain texts, the ones that are on the screen. And some of them are ancestral texts, or most of them are ancestral texts, so prepared by the United Nations with model laws. There is also the one on electronic transport records. But then you will see also the provision on the trust services, the cross-border recognition of the trust services, which is not mandatory, of course, but it's always in a best effort clause. But it would be really important to take that best effort clause seriously. And then you see, if you want to complement that at the EU level, you have the eIDAS regulation I already mentioned, first in 2014 and then revised. Now we call it eIDAS 2, but fundamentally still eIDAS, but with the EU ID wallet and other things. And then you have, for instance, now the EFTI regulation, which is coming in force, which applies only inside the EU and not not for maritime transport. But EFTI basically says that all the traders have the right to submit information to customs in electronic form. So the problem is, of course, you have to structure this information according to data models, but you also have to give assurance of quality of the data, and which you do with the eIDAS, because of course EFTI refers to eIDAS. But I would add to this also the forthcoming European single customs. Now you will correct me, but when I was little, I was told, and it was not yesterday, unfortunately, I was told that the European Union was born as a customs union. Now, and now we are trying to do the single window for customs in Europe, which I thought it was something interesting. Also, you have the single maritime window in the EU. And then you have specific applications, because in reality, you can use trust services also for specific information. Like, you know, now there is a digital product passport. And for certain information, especially for goods originating outside the EU, it is possible to associate these goods and some certifications already at the beginning digitally. So for instance, the source of the goods, the conditions, whether it is like, for instance, organic, ESG certification, the like, and so on and so forth. So these can all be put there. It's a lot, but when we think of all of that, we have always to ask the question, how can I be sure that the information is accurate? Not the veracity. The veracity means, is it true or is it not? I say that this jacket was produced without child labor. It's a statement. I don't know if the statement is true or not. I would have to inspect or something. But, of course, at least I know who made that statement, and that statement was not changed since it was made. Whether the statement is true or not is a different issue. Now, what is happening around the EU? I'm very happy that we have here some colleagues from Georgia with a typical example of a country that is seeking legal alignment with the European Union. Some are candidates, some are not candidates. But you see, these are the legal instruments of the EU that I mentioned before. Some of them apply only in the EU, some of them apply regardless, but in any case, it is not possible to do business, and especially to export goods to the EU, without understanding these information requirements and without asking the question how to satisfy them. Because then things become easier once this is addressed at the source. And I would say it's not only export to the EU, it's also import from the EU then, because let's say Georgia Customs, which is very advanced, is very happy to get information from the electronic bill of lading, but they need to know that that bill of lading was signed with a qualified signature under EIDAS. And then they can establish an equivalence. And when I make this example, it's not a hypothetical. I know they're very happy because we talked quite a bit and they are very advanced in customs digitalization. So basically what is happening is EIDAS in its current form is reverberating in this space around the EU. And EIDAS itself, one of the big changes between the first and the revised is that originally it was very difficult to conclude a mutual recognition agreement with the EU under EIDAS. But that has been changed, and now it can be done also through the Commission. It doesn't have to be a formal treaty. In part it was done because the first agreements came with some Ukrainian entities. So how that is implemented in practice is a different issue, and I think the relevant people in the Commission have been working very hard on the implementing acts, domestic implementing acts, and now we will start discussing the ones cross-border. But of course this is a huge priority. And I have to say that this is facilitated by the fact that many of these countries, and I'm talking about Eastern Europe, North Africa, they already have legislation that is very similar to EIDAS, which was already adopted. So the legal notions are compatible. The technical standards are based on ETSI standards, which are European standards. And so then whatever needs to be done to make a formal legal recognition should be easier. Then, of course, there is the next level, in particular Central Asia. I cannot say that all the countries of Central Asia fit into the description I just gave. Then there is also a focus more on technical standards, in part coming still from some Soviet influence, because electronic signatures in the Soviet Union, I'm talking about the Soviet Union, not after, were very much based on encryption technologies and national standards. So in some countries, not all, and this is changes, there is a very detailed technical specifications on the type of signatures that are recognized. And there is also a notion of certified electronic document, which means that the electronic document does not exist if it's not signed with the government-sanctioned electronic signature. But of course, most electronic documents used in trade and outside trade are not signed with that signature. Someone buys on Amazon, Alibaba, whatever, will not buy with that signature. So, which creates a gap between the theory and the practice of electronic commerce. And even those that are signed with that electronic signature, if there is no mechanism for legal recognition, things become difficult. Now, I have to say, sorry, I didn't mean to do this. I have to say there were some discussions and also some progress, in particular in the Eurasian community and the Eurasian Customs Union. So, for instance, Kazakhstan, Russia, there were some mutual recognition agreements and the like, maybe also with Belarus. But again, this is, like in other parts of the world, because I've seen the same, for instance, in Latin America with Alianza del Pacifico has a similar PKI, mutual recognition scheme. But the problem is that if it is based on PKI, if it's based on encryption, again, it is technology specific, and end-to-end trade digitalization wants to be technology neutral. So we have to take into account the prevailing trends, respect those technologies that gives a higher level of security, but at the same time give legal recognition also to all other forms of signatures and other trust services, which may be perfectly fine for the purpose of the parties, depending on the type of transaction and also other elements like the size of the transaction, the party's sophistication, and so on and so forth. I believe that JSI statement paves the way forward. I'm happy to report that even in Central Asia, some countries, one of them is Kazakhstan, Georgia, I think also too, not Central Asian, but Caucasus, of course, are parties of the JSI statement. Central Asia now is getting a lot of attention as this corridor for trade between East Asia and Europe. But of course, the corridors are two. One is the physical one, and one is the digital one. So I would stop here for the time being, so we can have a bit of discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Luca, for your very interesting presentation, getting together different parts of international trade, but also commercial law. And I take this advantage of standing here, and my first question would be, so we had quite, it's more on theoretical level, I would say, we had quite a clear differentiation between the roles of different international organizations like WTO and UNCTAD, for instance, in that case. But we see here that because these three pillars which we have shown here, B2B, B2G, and G2G, are merging together because of data-based information exchange, doesn't it mean that we are getting in times where like these lines, border lines between the scope or let's say areas of activity of these organizations getting more blurred? And what kind of potentials do you see for the future regarding all the international situation with that regard? Now you are not in UNCTAD, you are not bound by
Yeah, no, now I'm not, but I have to say my answer would be the same, actually, because I think this is not so controversial in a way. We have to separate two things. One is, in general, of course, there is not support for multilateralism. Mm-hmm. That is a fact. UN and related agencies, even before we get to the practical problems like the financial problems, there is a political problem. That is to say, the states, or some states, don't go to the United Nations to discuss a serious political problem. They go to some other place, or they do it primarily.
In a way, the existence of the group of the Joint Statement Initiative on E-commerce is evidence of the way forward, which is, it's not multilateral, it's plurilateral. But of course, this is very dangerous, especially in the field of electronic commerce, because if we have a dramatic problem, is the digital divide. And of course, most of the states, there are states that are in certain parts of the world, not necessarily, there are some, a few least developed countries, there are several developing countries, but I would say it's in particular a regional problem. So Europe, yes, Asia, yes, but with sub-regional differences. Latin America, yes, Africa, not so much. So it becomes a little bit very, you know, one can see something there. it's not so much a matter of which agency would do what. It's a matter of which part of the world or which body will find enough consensus to go ahead. So the content of the JSI originally came from the TPP, the e-commerce chapter of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which again, now we have the young ones here, but TPP was what President Obama wanted to leave as a way to coordinate economies in the Pacific, on both sides of the Pacific. But without China. But without China. And when there was the first Trump administration, and the first thing with the first term of President Trump was to undo the TPP. And immediately after, all the other states did the CPTPP, which was the TPP reloaded without the US. And then China did the RCEP, which was the TPP, CPTPP, revised, but with a lot of the same states, by the way, and all ASEAN member states actually, you know, so it was becoming like, and it's really interesting because, by the way, all of these things, there is no European insight in this discussion. So let's just bear in mind where Europe stands, nowhere in this discussion. And then this is taken to the WTO, but not really because it's not a WTO discussion, because formally the WTO cannot have this discussion. But there is a joint statement initiative. So already, and this has been going on for a bit. It's not, you know, it's what, 10 years at least we are discussing. So, so you clearly see here certain things. You see that there are regional and sub-regional groups. You see progress around certain interests. And in the end, you also see with Europe. So that one is also a sign that some regions are more interested than others. Nothing prevents other regional commissions from doing the same or even from thinking of a global agreement, but it's not happening.
Let's see, because we very soon we will get new leadership in different institutions across the United Nations system, but not only. Please, Professor Titi.
But just to add, I mean, the problem, of course, is not the forum in which you agree on rules and harmonize rules, but the problem is the politicization of the issue, and we see that with the JSI because of India and the most unfortunate role India is playing in this regard, opposing any further steps in the liberalization of e-commerce in WTO, which is a purely political movement and has, in my perspective, no connection or rationality in the economic potential we have in e-commerce and paperless trade.
Yeah, this is, of course, this is very clear in the discussions around the moratorium. And for those who wanted to find out more, MC14 took place 2 months ago, so it's possible to find all the reports online and everything. India, of course, has always been the one opposing the extension of the moratorium, but others were there. South Africa, for instance, used to be close. I don't know what was their position now in Yaoundé, but in MC13, South Africa was also challenging when it was in Abu Dhabi. So yes, of course, there is an opposition, but at the same time, this opposition, which is for political reasons, does not allow to address the real issues. Because if maybe if one would get over that, it would be possible to really work on the digital divides. Now we call them in plural. But because of that opposition, there is no multilateral action. And then plurilateral action is always targeted and voluntary. So that makes the whole system dysfunctional.
Any questions from the room? I know it's quite a specific topic. It needs a little bit of deep dive, but on the other side, maybe something for understanding. Would ask another question, maybe from the regional perspective. I would then ask you, if you say this kind of perspective, you have mentioned this multilateral and regional almost always you put it with, let's say, with some connections, but it doesn't matter. But what we see, another, let's say, idea or let's say another logic behind is to think in corridors, right? So like multilateralism, plurilateralism, and on the third side, I would say, we want to just establish a corridor, and this solution should work just for this corridor. And this is what we right now have with this middle corridor, where Georgia, Kazakhstan, but also Azerbaijan, China, but also European Union should be in at least, Turkey, for instance, Turkey. And the point is, could this kind of approach be a reasonable one to say, okay, we have a corridor is functioning, this is it, and we have, by this way, at least on the technical level, so then you need for sure technical standardization, you need unilateral rules, you need like kind of harmonization that enabling this corridor. Does it work? Is that another opportunity?
It's not wrong to think in those terms, but I think one has to also to consider that a lot of these discussions, unfortunately, are based on the idea to transpose existing processes online by repeating them and maybe putting some marginal improvements. You know, the famous distinction between digitization, which is basically scanning a document and sending it by email. Digitalization, which means that that document maybe has fields and is based on standard data modeling and whatever. So it is already interoperable, it can be exchanged. And digital transformation, which means the document does not exist anymore. There is a single source of information that shares data with each partner in real time based on actual needs. So you only give each one what they need to have and based on data minimization principle. So, and nobody is really thinking about digital transformation. They all think, especially the commercial operators, they all think, well, it's so nice that I can scan this thing and send it by email. But what do I do with that? I don't know, because all the idea of that aggregation, analysis, and reuse doesn't work. Anyway, once you move closer to the concept of digital transformation, of course you can think in terms of corridors, but it's also irrelevant in the sense that you can create as many virtual corridors as you want, as long as the standards are open and interoperable, as long as data quality assurance is based on the shared rules recognized by everyone, then that's okay. It can be done, it will happen.
Yeah, but that could be a way forward, because then you have, in this middle corridor logics, you have European Union in, and you have China in, and all the states in between. And this, in a way, just forcing everyone to make this corridor just functioning, like it's less political, sure, that's always political, but all of them have a shared role to enable this very concrete trade route to make like a larger step forward. Then you can take these standards and apply in a more global way, like using these logics, not to take it to very multilateral, very politicized discussions, but try to solve it in, I would say, for very specific project, and then to take these approaches and even informally use it for different.
But that logic is, of course, the same logic as we always had it with regard to plurilateral agreements. Also, the plurilateral agreements within the WTO, that that's the idea, to which India opposes, because they say, no, we need a multilateral solution and not plurilateral solutions. And on the middle corridor, it's simply coincident of geography, let's say, that we do have this middle corridor, but we know that, and we have it today, but who knows what is tomorrow. And therefore, I would strongly say we still need multilateral solutions.
Sure.
And that is regard to the potential of economic prosperity by trade facilitation that is in there.
I would add to that
there is an assumption, implicit assumption in this discussion. I agree with what was said, but the assumption is we are doing B2G exchanges. Because in reality, if we would look at the B2B part, if we would implement party autonomy and technology neutrality, we would already be able now to do whatever we want. But in reality, we can't, partly because of the lack of recognition of trust services. Yeah. So the B2B part would be the easier part, maybe, but even that one needs work. And the B2G part, it raises certain issues, but again, if we are now discussing about the European single windows for customs now, you know, I think that as Europeans we should first look into our own issues, and then the ASEAN single window should have been operational some 10, 15 years ago, but it's nowhere near. Partly because of data sharing concerns and the like. So we know now that data sharing is not complete, is not absolute. It has to be done case by case in a selective way. Okay, we learned a lot of lessons, but there's still a way to go. At the same time, it is completely ununderstandable why, on paper, everybody accepts that there is an import declaration, an export declaration, and nobody puts them together. Often they say two different things. Yeah. But when we do that electronically, which means everyone really has the same, and everything is transparent, and we know what it is, everybody disagrees. They don't want to see that. So we have to look a bit into this from different angles.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we are out of time already. This was a great presentation. Thank you, and a completely different angle of view. And I hope that we will have